Imagine it's 1983 and the Atari 2600 is still your go-to console of home gaming. Your best friend down the street gets all the hot new titles for their Atari, while you're still stuck with, wouldn't it be great if you could borrow your friend's brand new game cart without having to, actually deprive them of enjoying it at the same time? Vidco thought they had the answer with the Copy Cart. Let's take a look. Growing up, it seems like we all had that one friend or relative that got the latest games for birthdays, Christmas, or just because, while the rest of us had to save our allowance, mow lawns, shovel driveways, or do other small jobs to earn that sweet, sweet spending cash. I mean, sure, maybe your friend would let you borrow the cart once they got bored with it, or the next new game arrived, but who wanted to play yesterday's title, right? If only there was a way. You could, of course, spend $50 for a couple titles, risking the disappointment of a bad game and being broke when the next game drops, or you could purchase, via mail order, a new product from Vidco. This is the Vidco Copy Cart for the Atari 2600. Originally, it could be bought as a kit that included the duplicator device here with the red button, one blank copy cart to store your completely legitimate backup of a game, and one Zymag branded game, Disaster. The duplicator required one 9-volt battery to power it, and the copy cart needs 3 AA batteries to hold the backup of the game ROM. When you take a look at the copy cart from the state of the market, it quickly becomes apparent this was a doomed product from the start. The initial investment of $50 plus the cost of batteries would get you the ability to copy and play at least one game as much as you like, easily swapping to another game whenever you wish, and for the cost of one new game, somewhere around $30, you could buy 2 more copy carts at $16 each. Aside from the extra cost of batteries and needing friends that get a steady supply of new games for you to copy, and were willing to let you copy the games, which I'll come back to in a moment, it might sound like a solid alternative. But this was 1983, and by then Atari had already been out for 6 years. Plenty of people had already bought a system, a small library of games, and had even grown bored with it. Plus, the famous video game crash hit the same year. This meant there was a healthy secondary market of used and new systems and games to be had on the cheap or heavily discounted. My very first Atari system was used. I remember being barely old enough to even know that video games existed yet when my dad brought home a cardboard box stuffed with an Atari 2600 system and a bunch of games he had purchased off a coworker whose kid had grown bored with the system. I remember him connecting it to the console TV we had in the living room, and the first time I tried, well, at the time it was mind-blowing for little me. I'm sure my story is not unique, and over the years I remember finding additional Atari carts at flea markets for a couple bucks or less. The market was well on its way to the bottom. It's no surprise this oddity of hardware is typically listed as extremely rare. Likely very few people had reason to buy one by the time it was available. I've had this particular copy cart since I was around elementary school age. I picked it up at a yard sale for I think a couple bucks. I remember it being on a table mixed with a bunch of other household junk and being perplexed at what it was exactly. I knew it at least had an Atari game I didn't own, and I think at the time I wrongly thought, due to the multiple lines on the copy cart label, that I'd be able to copy 5 to 6 games at a time and play them somehow. I may have had the original styrofoam and cover back then, but sadly I was too young to care about keeping it if it did. I remember briefly playing with it a few times, thinking it was neat that I could plug in the cart on one side and clone it to the other. I played Disaster a bit, enjoyed it, and then grew bored with the game, and the item was set aside for other titles in my small collection. You might be asking yourself, hey, did you not try copying a friend's game at least? Interesting question, and the answer comes down to the design of this cart. From the front, the cart looks fairly normal. When you flip it around, though, there's a big difference. Notice this cutout section? Is it a cost-saving measure? No. You see, if you look inside the duplicator, there's a raised section which makes it impossible to fit any normal Atari cart in this end without either opening the cart to remove the PCB, modifying, i.e. cutting a notch in your Atari cart, or modifying this device by somehow getting a tool in there to drill or cut out this block. Remember when I mentioned your friends would need to be willing to let you copy? Yeah, doubtful they'd let you mangle their carts, and I'm not sure how excited anyone would be to cut into the duplicator either. I'm sure this was done to protect the maker from being sued by Atari. Like the Atari game carts, there's a screw hidden under the serial number sticker on both the duplicator and copy cart. I had to open up the copy cart to fix damage to the battery terminals a while back. So let's take a look at what's inside the copy cart. Start by removing the battery cover via pressing in on the cover and pushing away from the screw. Remove the 3 batteries. With the serial number sticker peeled off, use a Phillips screwdriver to remove the screw that is beneath it. Next, there are 4 points around the cart where it clips together. Carefully putting pressure at each of these points with your thumb and pulling the halves apart will pop the clips loose. Once all 4 corners are loose, open the cart slowly to reveal the PCB and internal parts. There's a plastic guide that will be loose inside the cart. This is a guide for plugging the cart into the Atari slot. The PCB is connected via 2 wires to the battery terminals. Lift it carefully so as not to stress the connections. If you need to remove the PCB fully, you'll need to remove the battery terminals first. Here, I just want to give you a look at the PCB, so I'll only flip it around instead of removing it. On the board, there are 2 SRM 2016C SRAM 2K x8 200 nanosecond chips, which means a total of 4K of SRAM. There's also a 4011 BPC or 8316 chip that may be a voltage regulator, but I'm not sure. There's also a 16 volt 10 microfarad electrolytic cap and a host of various resistors. So how does this thing work exactly? Well, it's very simple. You place your original game cart in this end, helpfully labeled game cart, and the copy cart in the other end, also helpfully labeled copy cart. Once both are seated, you press the red button on the duplicator and the red light lights up. It takes a couple of seconds, and once the light goes off, release the button and you are ready to play. Let's take just a moment to talk about the packing game that came with the duplicator. The game is based on a circus act where a performer keeps a number of plates balanced and spinning atop long poles. As the performer, you must move between the poles and press the button on your joystick to keep the plates spinning. Your score continuously counts up. As the game progresses, more plates are added and the plates slow down faster, giving you less time to dash between the poles. If a plate falls, you can catch it and it is immediately placed back atop the pole. If the plate hits the ground, there's a crash noise and you lose one of the plate indicators to the bottom left. If too many plates hit the ground, the game ends. You have to think quickly on your feet, keep up with which order the plates will slow down, and plan your route to master this game. Thankfully, as a kid, I never felt a need or had proper access to tools to mod this device, and it wasn't much longer until I moved on to the NES and left the Atari behind. So I never did know for certain if this duplicator would actually work with carts other than the small catalog of titles made specifically to fit in an unmodified duplicator. I think back then I assumed it would not. I decided it's finally time to answer my own question, but I needed some carts to test with. The problem is, Atari carts are generally designed such that the label covers the screw holding the cart together, along with plastic clips on the sides, And further, the end labels also stretch across the divide between top and bottom. This means in order to open one, you basically have to damage the label or use a very careful process of heating and trying to peel these already ancient labels and still risk damaging them. It's just not something I'm willing to do. The first step here was to look around various flea markets and shops to find carts in very rough shape, specifically with labels already removed or damaged enough to expose the screw, but at a cheap price. I happened on these two perfect candidates, Asteroids and Yar's Revenge, for $1.50 each. Both already had the labels damaged where the screw for disassembling the cart is hidden and had missing or damaged end cap labels. I could have used a Dremel, but even in this condition, I still have an aversion to further damaging the carts, so instead I used my trusty screwdriver and a plastic prying tool to carefully pop the carts open to access the PCBs inside. The pins needed some cleaning, and after a quick test to make sure they functioned in the Atari, I was ready to try the copy test. I don't have a 2600 system handy, but as you can see, the 7800 seems to work well enough with the clone cart playing Disaster. So next, I removed the PCB from Yar's Revenge to test. Follow the same process. Light is off and it works. A couple of seconds and Howard Scott Warshaw's hard work is mine to enjoy for free. After the cost of the duplicator and some batteries. Yar's Revenge is a good example of another problem with only having a copy of a game. I remember as a kid playing this game at a cousin's house and never quite knowing what to do to beat the enemy. He typically only ever had the carts. I assume he just tossed the boxes and manuals because I never remember seeing either in his room. And this is Atari. There's barely enough room on the cart for games. There was no such thing as on-screen instructions or internet archives to access instructions. You had to have the manual. Granted, most games were pretty straightforward enough that no manual was necessary, but some like Yar's Revenge or Star Master were fairly complex. Unless you could borrow or access the instructions, you might have been out of luck due to somewhat old-school DRM. Moving on to the next test, let's try Asteroids. Again, same process. Light goes off, remove the copy cart, plug it into the system, power on, and nothing. So I tried this a few times, cleaned the pins some more. As you can see, the original board works fine in the system, but the copy doesn't. From a little unscientific research, it looks like Yar's Revenge is over 3 kilobytes in size, but still under 4, and Asteroids is a little over 5 kilobytes in size, at least going by ROM dumps. I think I'm exceeding that 4 kilobytes of SRAM on the copy cart. It seems most Atari games were 4 kilobytes in size, though some could exceed that amount via bank switching. I couldn't say how often this problem would come up, but if the cart you tried to copy exceeded 4 kilobytes, it wouldn't fit on this copy cart. While the copy cart is an interesting oddity of the time period and just goes to show that pirating wasn't something that came about with the internet, it was a solution looking for a problem. Had something like this hit the market early in the life of the Atari, it may have gained some ground, but by 1983, the market was already saturated with used and discounted inventory, and leading into the infamous crash. I'm lucky to have found one of these devices as a youngster, and luckier still to have managed to hold on to it for so many years so that I could share it with you. I hope you enjoyed this dive into the Vidco Copy Cart for the Atari 2600. I appreciate you watching, and if you did enjoy this video, please leave a like and feel free to comment below. Thanks.